I used to think silence was a kind of kindness, that if you loved someone, you stayed quiet when they hurt you, because they were young, because they didn't know better, because someday they'd understand. But silence can rot you from the inside. It eats through your patience, your dignity, and your name until one day you open your eyes and realize they've turned you into a ghost in your own house. That's what my granddaughter did to me, and I let her. Until the day I didn't. It started with the dishes. Always something small, right? "Grandma, please don't wash them. You'll chip the glasses." Her voice was sugar-coated irritation. Then it was, "Grandma, don't touch my laundry. It's delicate." And finally, "Grandma, maybe you could stay out of the kitchen while I film. You make too much noise." Noise. That's what I'd become. Background static in her life. Her name's Lila. 26, sharp as a blade, all ambition and image. She works at a digital news company in New York, or as she says, "I am the story, Grandma." She films everything, her work, her meals, her face, always her face. I moved in after my hip surgery last winter, thinking I'd just stay through recovery, but months passed, and she never asked when I'd leave. Not out of kindness, just out of distraction. I wasn't in her world anymore, only orbiting it like a dead planet. Still, I was proud of her. I told anyone who'd listen that my Lila was a journalist, not just a writer, but an investigator. I'd spent 40 years in that same world once upon a time, back when newsrooms smelled like cigarette smoke and adrenaline, when people cared about truth more than clicks. But she never asked about that. She didn't even know I'd been an editor. To her, I was just Grandma Joe, the one who made tea too loudly. The shift happened one morning in April. I'd made breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and tea. She was at the counter, hair twisted up, speaking into her phone camera with that bright, hollow smile. "So guys," she chirped, "today I have the biggest opportunity of my career. My editor says if I nail this piece, I might get a permanent spot on the investigative team." She winked at the camera. "It's about legacy journalism. Can the old ways survive in a digital world? Anyway, wish me luck." She turned off the recording and sighed. "God, this place smells like eggs." I smiled gently. "I thought you liked breakfast before interviews." "I can't eat that. It's carbs." She glanced at the pan. "And Grandma, maybe you could, I don't know, not move around while I'm filming? The mic picks up everything." I nodded, feeling that small, familiar burn in my chest. "Of course, dear." She grabbed her laptop and coffee. "Anyway, don't wait up. Big meeting at noon. Oh, and..." She hesitated. "If anyone calls for me, just say I'm not home. It's a work thing." Then she left. By the time the apartment door closed, I was standing in that quiet kitchen, staring at my reflection in the toaster. My own face startled me. Wrinkled, pale, eyes like two tired storms. "Legacy journalism," I whispered. She had no idea. When she came home that night, I was waiting at the table with tea. She looked drained, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. "How'd it go?" I asked. Her jaw tightened. "Fine, it's just, my editor said the draft wasn't bold enough. He wants emotion. Something about how traditional journalists were out of touch. He wants me to interview someone old school, someone who doesn't get how the world works now. You know, like the dinosaurs still clinging to their typewriters." She laughed bitterly. "So basically, people like you." I froze. "Like me? Oh, no offense. I mean, you're not like that. You're sweet. Just, you wouldn't understand the industry today." I sipped my tea, letting the heat sting my tongue so I wouldn't speak. "No," I said finally. "I suppose I wouldn't." She smiled, kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, and went to her room. I sat there long after, the tea growing cold, my reflection trembling in the cup. She didn't know. She couldn't know that I had once been the editor who exposed a mayor's corruption, who stood in front of cameras and refused to retract a story even when it cost me my career. But what hurt most wasn't her ignorance. It was that she didn't care to ask. 2 weeks later, I found her crying at the kitchen table. Her laptop glowed with rejection. "They cut the piece," she said, voice flat. "Said it's too safe, that I didn't dig deep enough, that I'm not original." I touched her shoulder. "Maybe they're wrong." She looked up sharply. "You don't understand, Grandma. This was my shot. I need something huge, something that gets attention. They only care about stories that trend. Nobody wants some dusty fact-checking anymore. They want scandal." Then she said it, the sentence that split something inside me. "Sometimes you have to bend the truth a little if you want people to listen." I stared at her. "That's not journalism, Lila. That's marketing." She rolled her eyes. "Spare me the ethics lecture. You're not exactly an expert." I blinked. "Excuse me?" She closed the laptop. "Grandma, you're old-fashioned, okay? You think facts change the world, but they don't. People do. Influencers do. If I can make people feel something, that's worth more than being technically right." I wanted to say, "I once ran a paper that changed a governor's election," but I didn't. I just stood up and said softly, "You're wrong." That night, I couldn't sleep. I pulled out my old box of clippings, the yellowed newspaper pages, the awards, the photos of a younger me shaking hands with names that now lived only in archives. Among them, one article stood out: "Editor Josephine Ward resigns after whistleblowing scandal." That was me, Grandma Jo. The woman who'd uncovered fraud in her own newsroom and paid for it with her reputation. My daughter, Lila's mother, had been 12 then. I'd promised I'd never let the truth destroy our family again. But sitting there in the dark, I realized something. Truth doesn't destroy people. Lies do. The next morning, I watched Lila leave for another meeting. Then I opened her laptop, she'd forgotten to close it, and saw the headline draft for her news story, "Out of Touch, When Aging Journalists Refuse to Let Go." The first paragraph made my stomach twist. She'd written about me, about her sweet old grandmother who still clings to the fantasy that truth is simple. She'd quoted me without permission, twisting my words into something foolish. That's when the silence inside me cracked. I picked up the phone and dialed an old number I hadn't used in decades. It rang 3 times before a familiar, gravelly voice answered. "Ward, is that really you?" "Hello, Miles," I said. "It's been a long time. 30 years. What are you doing calling an old editor at 7 in the morning?" "I think," I said slowly, "it's time for a story." He chuckled. "About what?" "About legacy journalism," I said, "and about a young woman who's about to learn what it really means." Miles hesitated. "You always did have perfect timing, Joe." "Not this time," I whispered, looking at the draft glowing on her screen. "This time, it's personal." That was the moment I decided I wouldn't be her silent ghost anymore. I was going to remind my granddaughter and the world who Josephine Ward really was. But I didn't know yet just how much the truth would cost both of us. There's something cruelly beautiful about watching the truth come back to life after decades underground. It doesn't explode, it exhales. It slips through cracks you didn't know existed, whispering that maybe, just maybe, you're not done yet. That's how I felt the morning after I called Miles. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone's burden. I felt like a journalist again. The apartment was still, sun slicing through the blinds in thin gold ribbons. Lila's door was closed, her muffled voice leaking through. Probably another video call. "No, I haven't finished yet," she was saying. "Yes, I'll have the rewrite by Friday. I'm working on a new angle." A pause. "She's perfect for it." Perfect for it. I didn't need to guess who she was. By the time she left, I'd already brewed coffee, set out my notebook, and opened my old typewriter. Yes, a typewriter. I'd kept it for 40 years, its keys worn smooth by late nights and deadlines. My fingers trembled when I placed them on the letters. It was like shaking hands with an old friend. When Miles called back, his voice carried that same scratchy warmth it always had. "Joe, I can't believe it. You're still alive and raising hell." "Barely alive," I said, smiling, "but I'm thinking of writing something again." He whistled softly. "About your granddaughter, huh? I read her stuff. Slick, shallow, all gloss, no backbone. I assume this isn't a family newsletter." "Let's call it an editorial correction," I said. "Careful, Joe. You sure this isn't about revenge?" I stared at the framed photo on Lila's bookshelf, her and me when she was 6, flour on her cheeks from baking cookies, her tiny hand gripping mine. "It's about legacy," I said quietly. "Hers and mine." He chuckled. "That's the Joe I remember. All right. You write. I'll read. Maybe I can pitch it to my old contacts. People still respect your name, you know." "They forgot it," I said. He paused. "Then remind them." That night, I began writing. The words came out shaky at first, like my hands were learning their purpose again. I wrote about the death of truth in modern journalism, about how clicks replaced conscience, how honesty had become an antique word. But beneath it all, it was a letter to Lila, a letter she didn't know was for her. By 2 a.m., I had 10 pages. When I looked up, the city outside was dark except for one window across the street, a flicker of blue light. Lila's laughter echoed faintly from her room, bright and hollow. I wondered if she was talking to that editor she pretended not to care about. The next morning, she breezed into the kitchen with a kind of forced cheer. "Morning, Grandma." "Morning, dear." She poured coffee and added sugar without tasting it. "Hey, random question," she said too casually. "You still have those old press photos from your newspaper days?" My heart stuttered. "Why?" "Oh, I just thought it might be nice to include a picture in my article. You know, for context. Nostalgia sells." I watched her carefully. "What kind of context?" "Don't be so suspicious," she laughed. "You are a journalist. I'm writing about the generational gap, not trying to hurt you. The thing about people who lie for a living is they forget how to lie to someone who invented the trade." Her smile was too stiff, her tone too bright. I'd written that expression on hundreds of faces. "Of course," I said gently. "I'll look for them." She smiled, kissed my cheek, and left for her office. The moment the door shut, I called Miles. "She's using me," I said. "I figured as much. What's the plan?" "I'm going to give her exactly what she wants," I said, "and a bit more." That afternoon, I pulled out the box of photos from under my bed, my entire career sealed in a cardboard tomb. I chose 3, one of me in front of the newsroom in 1989, one from the press conference after the corruption scandal, and one of me holding the resignation letter that ended my career. I knew which one she'd pick. The last one. The one that looked like defeat. I left the photos on the table, pretending I'd forgotten them there. By evening, they were gone. At dinner, she was quiet. Too quiet. Then, just before she went to bed, she said softly, "Grandma, I love you. You know that?" The worst lies are wrapped in tenderness. "Of course," I said. When she left for work the next morning, she kissed my forehead and said, "Wish me luck." I did, because she'd need it. By noon, Miles had my article. He called me from his car, laughing. "Joe, this is brilliant, brutal and brilliant. You didn't just write a critique, you wrote a manifesto." "Will anyone publish it?" He paused. "More than that, I sent it to the Sentinel. They're running it tomorrow." I nearly dropped the phone. "Tomorrow?" "They moved mountains for you, Joe. You're a legend. Don't act surprised." When I hung up, I sat very still. My heart thudded unevenly. I hadn't been published in 30 years. The thought made my eyes sting. That evening, Lila came home glowing. "Grandma, guess what? My piece goes live tomorrow." "What a coincidence," I murmured. She didn't notice. "It's going to be huge. My editor said it's my most personal story yet. I even added some emotional stuff about family and the past. You'll see." "Oh, I will," I said. She laughed, oblivious, and disappeared into her room. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I sat by the window watching the city lights tremble in puddles of rain. 2 stories both going live in the morning. Hers, a glossy takedown of old journalism. Mine, a confession, a defense, and maybe a final warning. At 6 a.m., I brewed coffee and waited. By 8, it started. Her door flew open. "Grandma," she shouted. I turned. "Good morning." She was holding her phone like a weapon. "What did you do?" I blinked. I wrote. "You wrote? You wrote?" Her voice cracked. "My editor just called. He said my story's been pulled because of your article. You completely undercut my angle. They said publishing both would make me look unethical." I sipped my coffee. "Did you read it?" She threw her phone on the table, screen blazing with my headline, "The Death of Truth, a journalist's farewell letter to her granddaughter's generation." I met her eyes. "Now you have your scandal." Her face went pale. "You humiliated me." I told the truth. "You stole my career before it even started." I stood slowly. "No, darling, I saved it. Before you became exactly what you claimed to fight." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, trembling. You don't understand how this world works anymore." I nodded. "You're right. I don't understand a world where lies get applause." She turned away, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I wish you'd just stayed quiet." And there it was again, that old poisonous request. Silence. But it was too late. The world had heard me now. What neither of us knew then was that my article would go viral, not because of nostalgia, but because readers recognized the name Josephine Ward. Journalists started digging into who I was, into the story I'd buried 30 years ago, and in doing so, they unearthed secrets Lila had built her whole career on. Within a week, the story of one fading editor and her ambitious granddaughter was everywhere, and I wasn't sure anymore who it was destroying or saving. When your name starts trending again after 3 decades of silence, it doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like standing in front of a mirror that suddenly starts talking back. Every part of you that's aged, softened, surrendered, the world throws it onto a screen and says, "Oh, look, she's still alive. That's how it began." By Monday morning, my inbox was an avalanche. Messages from reporters I hadn't heard from since the Clinton years. Former colleagues writing, "Legend, still have your spine, Joe." Strangers calling me a truth warrior. I even got one message from a freshman journalism student. "I printed your article and taped it above my desk. Please never stop writing." I smiled when I read that. But under the warmth was dread, because I knew the story wasn't over. Not for me, and certainly not for Lila. She spent the first 2 days avoiding me. I'd hear her in her room pacing, muttering into her phone. I didn't steal her quotes. She said I could use them. No, I didn't know she was writing something. The lies came easy to her now. Too easy. By the 3rd morning, she came out pale, eyes rimmed red from sleeplessness. "They suspended me," she said quietly. I looked up from my newspaper. For what? For conflict of interest, for plagiarism, for... Her voice cracked. "God, they're calling me a fraud." I set the paper down. "Did you tell them the truth?" "What truth? That my own grandmother ambushed me?" I exhaled slowly. "You wrote about me, Lila. You painted me as a relic." "It was just a metaphor," she shouted. "You didn't have to ruin me." Her words hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to tell her that reputations recover, that shame fades, that she'd survive, but she wasn't ready to hear it, so I said nothing. That night, she packed a bag. "I'm going to stay with friends for a while," she said, avoiding my eyes. "Lila, don't," she said sharply. "Don't try to fix this." The door closed. I listened to the echo until it faded into the hum of the refrigerator. It should have felt peaceful. It didn't. The apartment felt like a grave again. 3 days later, Miles called. "You sitting down?" "Usually am," I said. "Your piece hit 1 million views. The Sentinel wants a follow-up. They're calling it the revival of the real. They think you've started a conversation." I laughed bitterly. I didn't start it. I just reminded them it used to exist. He hesitated. There's something else. A documentary team reached out. They're doing a series about journalism ethics. They want you. I almost said no. I'd spent half my life running from cameras. But then I thought of Lila, the girl who believed image mattered more than integrity. Maybe seeing her grandmother on screen for something real might shake something loose. Tell them yes, I said. The crew came 2 weeks later, 3 young filmmakers with bright eyes and bottomless coffee cups. They set up in my living room, adjusting lights, taping cords to the floor. One of them, a boy with curly hair, asked, "Can we see your old press materials? Maybe some headlines?" I nodded and brought out the box again, the same one Lila had stolen from. They handled the papers gently, reverently, like museum pieces. "You brought down an entire political machine," the girl said, wide-eyed. "Why did you quit after that?" I hesitated. Because the truth cost me people I loved. That night, after the crew left, I sat on the couch staring at that sentence replaying in my head. The truth cost me people I loved. It was true then, and it was true now. The following morning, my landline rang, the one that almost never did. "Grandma." Her voice was small, shaky. "Lila? I'm outside." I opened the door. She stood there, coat unbuttoned, face raw from crying. "I lost my job," she said simply. "They're blacklisting me. No one wants to hire the girl who exploited her grandmother." "Come in," I said. She stepped inside like she was walking into a stranger's home. "I saw your interview," she murmured. "You were amazing. Everyone's quoting you." I smiled softly. I didn't say anything new, just old things people forgot to care about. "I read the comments," she whispered. "They called me your example of everything wrong with journalism." "I didn't name you," I said gently. "You didn't have to." She sat down, staring at her hands. I wanted to tell stories that mattered. But somewhere along the way, I started performing them instead. I nodded. "Happens to the best of us." "I don't deserve forgiveness," she said quietly. "Forgiveness isn't something you deserve, Lila. It's something you give yourself permission to earn." She looked up, tears glassing her eyes. "I don't even know where to start." "Start small," I said. "Write something true." She laughed weakly. "Who'd read it?" I leaned back, smiling. "You'd be surprised who still reads the truth when they recognize it." For a few days, we found a rhythm again. She'd make tea, I'd type. She started journaling quietly, scribbling into a worn notebook like a penitent schoolgirl. Sometimes she'd ask me questions. "How do you interview someone who doesn't want to talk?" Or, "What if the truth hurts people?" I answered honestly, "You talk less and listen more. And if it hurts, it means it matters." It was fragile, but it was peace. Until the phone rang again. Miles. "Joe, you're not going to like this. Someone's digging into your old resignation. Says there's more to that scandal than you let on." My stomach tightened. "Who?" "A freelancer from Lila's old company. Name's Brett. Thinks you covered up something 30 years ago. Says he's got documents." I felt cold. "He doesn't know what he's holding." Miles's voice dropped. "Then maybe it's time you told the rest of the story." That night, Lila found me staring at the box of clippings again. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Someone's reopening the past." She frowned. "You mean that corruption case?" I hesitated. Yes and no. She studied me. "Grandma, what really happened back then?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the same wide-eyed curiosity that had once made her dream of being a reporter. She deserved the truth. So I told her about the night my source disappeared, about how the story that cost me my career had been only half told, about the files I'd buried to protect someone, her mother. Lila sat frozen. "Mom?" "She didn't do anything wrong," I said. "She was 16, scared, and caught in the middle. The governor's son tried to use her. I went public. They buried me to bury the scandal." Lila's hands shook. "You took the fall for her." "I took the fall for justice," I said quietly, "but she never forgave me for the fallout. She moved across the country and stopped answering my calls. You were 3. Tears filled her eyes. I always thought she left because you were cold. She said you cared more about your work than your family. I felt my chest tighten. She wasn't wrong. Lila took my hand. Maybe we both made the same mistake then, forgetting that truth without love is just another form of pride. I didn't have an answer. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, soft but insistent, like a reminder that nothing buried stays quiet forever. Because somewhere out there, a journalist named Brett was about to dig into the story that could destroy the fragile peace we'd just rebuilt, and expose the secret I'd kept for 30 years, and this time, silence might not save either of us. The call came before sunrise. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I shouldn't have answered. But instinct, the old newsroom reflex, told me that bad news doesn't wait for permission. "Mrs. Ward?" a man's voice asked, low and calm. "This is Brett Collier from the Metropolitan Journal. I think you know why I'm calling." My stomach tightened. "If you're going to threaten me, Mr. Collier, at least do it after I've had breakfast." He chuckled softly, too polite for what he wanted. "No threats, ma'am, just questions. I'm working on a piece about the 1993 resignation scandal at the Sentinel. You were the editor in question." "I still am," I said. He hesitated, thrown off. "Right. Well, I have documents that suggest you suppressed evidence connected to a minor at the time. There's reason to believe you covered up a relationship between the governor's son and a young girl to avoid political fallout. Is that accurate?" My hand trembled. "No," I said evenly. "That's not accurate. That's dangerous gossip dressed up as journalism." Brett sighed, the way young reporters do when they think they're about to make a career off an old scandal. "I'd love to give you a chance to comment before I run the piece." "Then here's my comment," I said, voice steady now. "You're chasing a story that destroyed enough lives already. Don't add yours to the list." He paused. "Was the girl your daughter, Mrs. Ward?" Silence. He already knew. I hung up. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the steam curling off my coffee like it was trying to escape the same way I wished I could. When Lila came out of her room, hair messy, eyes still swollen from sleep, she froze at my face. "Grandma, what happened?" I slid the phone toward her. "They're digging." She paled. "The reporter?" I nodded. "He knows about your mother." Lila sat down hard. "What are we going to do?" I looked at her, my granddaughter, my mirror of mistakes, and said quietly, "We're going to tell the truth before someone else decides what it is." She blinked. "You're going public?" "Yes." "But Grandma, if this comes out, Mom, she's already been living in hiding from it her whole life," I said. "So have I." That afternoon, I called Miles again. His groggy voice answered on the third ring. "You don't sleep anymore, do you?" "Not since journalism stopped," I said. "Miles, there's another story. One I never told." He was silent for a moment. "The one you took the fall for?" "Yes, but this time, I'm not taking the fall alone." When Lila heard that, her hands clenched. "You mean, we write it together?" I studied her carefully. Her eyes were wide, nervous. But underneath the fear was something I hadn't seen before. Resolve. "You want to help?" "I want to understand," she said softly, "and maybe fix what I broke." So we began. We spent the next week sifting through boxes of notes, transcripts, photos. Lila sat beside me, typing as I dictated, her brow furrowed, her silence heavy with realization. She saw what journalism used to look like. Real notes, real sources, real consequences. On the fourth night, she looked up from her keyboard. "Grandma, this is a cover-up of state-level corruption. These people could still be alive." "They are," I said, "and some of them are still powerful." She swallowed hard. "Then why did you stop?" I closed my eyes. remembering the night I found the letter. Because they sent a threat. Who? The governor's office. A message on my doorstep. Publish. And your daughter disappears. Lila's hands froze over the keyboard. You didn't tell anyone? I tried, I whispered, but my editor pulled the plug, said no story was worth a child's life. 2 days later, I resigned. The girl they were protecting was your mother. Her face crumpled. Mom never knew. She knew enough to hate me for it. The air between us went still. It felt like all the years I'd spent holding the truth inside were pressing on my ribs. But then she reached out, laid her hand over mine. Then maybe it's time people know what really happened. Her voice shook, but her eyes didn't. Are you sure? I asked. She nodded. If I ever want to be a real journalist, I have to start with this. We spent days working on the piece. Her words, my memory. She wrote the lead. 30 years ago. My grandmother buried the truth to protect her daughter. Today, I'm helping her dig it up. I cried when I read it. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was brave. When the story was done, we sent it to Miles. He called back that night, his voice trembling with awe. Joe, this isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. He paused. But you need to know. Publishing this will make enemies. Real ones. I've lived long enough with ghosts, I said. Enemies are easier. He sighed. Then buckle up. It's going live Monday. The next 48 hours were agony. Lila and I barely slept. She kept refreshing her phone, waiting for the storm to break, and when it did, it was bigger than either of us imagined. By noon, our story had spread everywhere. The Sentinel, the Times, even international outlets picked it up. Legendary journalist exposes decades-old political cover-up. Photos of me and Lila filled every feed. For the first time, people weren't mocking her. They were listening. But not everyone was celebrating. That evening, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. Too deliberate. Lila looked at me, eyes wide. Who is that? I didn't answer. I walked to the peephole. A man in a gray suit stood there, expression blank. He held an envelope. Mrs. Ward, he said, voice muffled through the door. I have a message for you from Governor Langley's office. My pulse quickened. Langley, the son of the governor I'd exposed, the dynasty still breathing. I opened the door an inch. What message? He slipped the envelope through the gap. You've stirred ghosts best left buried. Then he turned and walked away. Inside, Lila's voice trembled. What's in it? I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence typed in, bold. Some truths are fatal, Mrs. Ward. We both stared at it. The air seemed to thicken between us. Grandma, Lila whispered. What are we going to do? I folded the paper neatly and placed it on the counter. We're going to do what journalists do, sweetheart. What's that? I looked her in the eye. Follow the story to the end. You'd think fear would make you freeze, but real fear, the kind that smells like paper and ink and old sins, makes you move. It wakes up every muscle you thought time had retired. That's how I felt staring at that note on the counter, the one that said some truths are fatal. Lila wanted to call the police. I wanted to call a source. Old habits die harder than people think. Grandma, she said, clutching her phone. This isn't a movie. We can't just investigate this. Someone threatened you. I nodded. Yes, and they sent it by hand, which means they're nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. She blinked. You're not serious. Dead serious, I said, then instantly regretted my phrasing. That night, I barely slept. I lay on the couch with the envelope beside me, watching the shadows slide across the ceiling. The city felt quieter than usual, like it was holding its breath. At 3 a.m, I finally got up, made tea, and sat at my desk. My fingers itched for a typewriter, but I settled for a pen. Some things deserve to be written by hand. I started listing names, everyone tied to that original scandal. Governor Langley, His son, the donors, the aides, the press secretary who disappeared a week before I resigned. Half of them were dead now. But some still lived, including one name I hadn't thought about in years, Eleanor Langley, the governor's widow, the one who had begged me back then to spare the family. And she was still alive, 91 years old, living quietly in an upscale care home 2 hours north. By sunrise, I had a plan. When Lila woke up, I was already dressed, coat buttoned, a small notepad in my purse. "Where are you going?" she asked, panic in her voice. "North," I said simply. She groaned. "You're unbelievable. You get threatened and your response is a field trip? It's called follow-up. Then I'm coming with you." She crossed her arms, daring me to argue. I didn't. Maybe I was relieved. Maybe I didn't want to admit how much comfort there was in her stubbornness. It reminded me of myself, 30 years younger. The drive was long and gray. We barely spoke. The road stretched ahead like a confession neither of us knew how to make. When we finally reached the care home, a sterile place called Silver Pines, I told the nurse we were family friends. She looked at my press badge, then at my granddaughter's worried eyes, and let us through. Eleanor Langley was smaller than I remembered, her hair white and thin, her gaze still sharp as glass. When she saw me, she squinted, and then a smile flickered. "Josephine Ward, I wondered when you'd come back to finish what you started." My throat went dry. "You remember." "Of course I remember. You destroyed my husband's legacy." I took a seat beside her wheelchair. "Your husband destroyed his own legacy. I just printed the evidence." She chuckled, a brittle, papery sound. "And what good did it do? Another governor replaced him, then another. Same lies, different smiles." "I didn't come for politics, Eleanor." "No," she said. "You came for closure." She studied me. Then her eyes moved to Lila. "And you must be the granddaughter, the one writing now. You have your grandmother's fire." Lila hesitated. "You read our story?" Eleanor nodded slowly. Everyone did. The Langley name doesn't vanish easily. She leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "You've stirred things, child. You should be careful." "Is that another threat?" I asked. Her laugh cracked like dry wood. "I'm too old to threaten anyone, Josephine, but there are men who remember you, and not fondly. They were young when you humiliated them. They still have friends, money, records." I felt a chill creep up my spine. "Records?" "In a safe," she said. "My husband kept everything, notes, letters, the kind of evidence that could ruin more than reputations. When he died, our son took over the files." "Governor Langley, Jr." She nodded. "Yes, and he's not as patient as I am." Lila swallowed. "Where are the files now?" Eleanor looked at me with something almost like pity. "Do you really think I'd tell you that? Haven't you learned by now, dear, that truth is a hungry thing? Once you feed it, it eats everything." I leaned in closer. "Eleanor, people lost their lives because of that cover-up. Don't you want to set the record straight before you go?" Her eyes glistened. "The truth cost me my husband and my son's soul. What else is there to set straight?" For a moment, she looked impossibly small, just another old woman haunted by time. But before I could speak again, a nurse appeared at the door. "Mrs. Langley, your medication." Eleanor looked at me one last time. "Walk away, Josephine. You got your headlines. Don't let your granddaughter pay the same price." We drove back in silence. Lila stared out the window, her reflection pale in the glass. "She's protecting someone," she said finally. "She's protecting what's left of herself," I said softly. When we got home, it was nearly dark. I was reaching for the door when I noticed something taped to it, a small yellow envelope. My hands shook as I peeled it off. Inside was a printed photo. It was of Lila, taken from across the street. She gasped when she saw it. "Oh my God, when was this taken?" I flipped the photo over. On the back was a single line, typed in the same font as before. "Tell your story and she disappears." I felt my knees go weak. Lila grabbed my arm. "Grandma." What do we do?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "We do what I didn't do last time." She frowned. "What's that?" "We go public before they can bury it." I picked up the phone and called Miles. "Miles," I said, my voice low and shaking. "They've made it personal. I'm sending you everything, every file, every note. If anything happens to me or to Lila, you publish it all." He was silent for a beat. "Jesus, Joe, what did you find?" "Proof that the Langley family didn't just bribe officials," I said. "They silenced witnesses. One of them was a girl my daughter's age." Miles exhaled. "Then we'll make it count this time." After I hung up, Lila turned to me, pale but defiant. "If we do this, there's no going back." I looked at her, the fear, the strength, and felt something shift. "I know," I said quietly, "but maybe that's the point. The truth was never meant to take us back." Outside, the city was dark. Every window a different secret flickering in the distance. I held the photo in one hand and Lila's trembling fingers in the other. We were standing at the edge of something dangerous, maybe even fatal. But for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't afraid of the fallout, because I wasn't alone this time. And that meant they'd have to silence both of us to stop the story. It's strange what your mind does when you realize you might not wake up tomorrow. You don't think about death. Not really. You think about what will be left behind, whose story gets told and whose gets edited out. That's what kept me awake that night, sitting on the couch with Lila asleep beside me, her head on my shoulder, the envelope with her photo lying on the table like a live bomb. I'd spent most of my life chasing truth. Now truth was chasing me. At 2:01 a.m., I turned on the lamp and started writing again. Not an article this time, a statement. Everything I knew, everything I'd buried. Names, dates, payoffs, the threats, the letter. It wasn't polished or careful. It was just honest. I attached the scanned evidence and scheduled an email to Miles with one instruction. If he didn't hear from me by noon, publish it. For the first time in years, I felt light. Terrified, yes, but clean. The next morning, sunlight hit the kitchen window like forgiveness. Lila was already awake, typing furiously. "Grandma," she said breathlessly, "I couldn't sleep, so I started drafting something about the photo, the threats, all of it." "Good," I said softly. "Let's finish it together." She smiled faintly. Just like before. We spent the morning revising side by side. Her words had changed, less performance, more pulse. She wrote like someone who finally understood the weight of what truth costs. By noon, the piece was done. I hit send. The headline read, "They tried to silence her. They forgot her granddaughter was listening." Within an hour, it exploded. The article went viral faster than either of us could comprehend. Our inboxes flooded. Messages from former reporters, lawyers, activists, even survivors of that old corruption case. The internet wasn't just reading, it was roaring. And then came the inevitable. A black car parked across the street. Lila saw it first. "They're watching us," she whispered. I didn't flinch. "Good, let them watch." But by evening, the knocks began again, this time not polite. 3 hard thuds that made the walls vibrate. I went to the door. "Stay back," I told her. "Grandma." "It's all right." I opened it a few inches. 2 men in dark coats, the same gray suit from before. "Mrs. Ward," the first said, his tone flat. "We need a word." "About what?" "About a situation you've created." I smiled thinly. "Oh, the truth? Yes, she's quite a situation." The second man frowned. "We suggest you remove the story. There are consequences to continuing this." "Already scheduled distribution to 4 outlets," I said. "Pull the story and they'll think I'm dead. You don't want that headline." The first man's jaw tightened. "This isn't a game." "No," I said. "It's history. You just happen to be on the wrong side of it." He leaned closer, voice low and cold. "You won't survive this." "Funny," I said. "They told me the same thing 30 years ago. Still here." They turned and left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Lila's eyes were wide. "Grandma, you just Declared war? I said, sitting down slowly. Yes, I suppose I did. 2 hours later, Miles called. You made the evening news, he said, his voice trembling. Governor Langley's office just issued a statement. They're denying everything, calling it fabrication. Of course they are. He hesitated. Joe, there's something else. The FBI's opened an inquiry. They want to talk to you. Lila gasped. Oh my God. It's a good thing, I said quietly. It means they're scared. The next days were chaos. Reporters camped outside our building, microphones, flashing cameras, questions shouted over one another. Mrs. Ward, are you afraid for your safety? Did the Langley family threaten you? Is it true your daughter was the victim? I didn't answer. Some truths need time to find their voice. But one night, as I watched the news replay my face over and over, I saw something I hadn't expected. A segment titled The Legacy of Josephine Ward. They called me fearless. They called Lila brave. They called our story the spark that reignited faith in real journalism. When the camera cut to footage of us walking out of our apartment, hand in hand, I saw it. How small I looked beside her, how tall she stood now. She wasn't the girl chasing likes anymore. She was a journalist, my legacy. And for the first time, I let myself cry. A week later, an envelope arrived, white, unmarked. I froze before opening it, half expecting another threat. But inside was a single typed line. Thank you for finishing what I couldn't. There was no signature, just an old state seal watermark faintly visible under the light. I knew then that somewhere, someone inside that machine we'd exposed had chosen conscience over loyalty. The chain had finally broken. That night, I sat with Lila on the balcony, the city buzzing below. What now? She asked softly. Now? I smiled. We rest, then we write. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I used to think journalism was about fame, she said, but it's about responsibility, isn't it? Yes, I said, responsibility and sometimes forgiveness. She nodded, eyes shining. I think Mom would have been proud of you. My voice wavered. Maybe one day she'll forgive me for what I did. Maybe she already has, Lila whispered. We sat in silence, watching the sunrise bleed over the skyline, the color of ink and redemption. I thought of the little girl who once asked me why truth mattered so much. I thought of the woman she became and the one beside me now. And I realized something simple and enormous. I hadn't lost my legacy after all. I'd been raising it. The world would move on, of course. New scandals, new lies, new distractions. But somewhere, someone would remember two women, one old, one young, who refused to stay silent. And maybe that was enough. Grandma, Lila murmured, half asleep. If someone wrote our story, what would they call it? I smiled into the dawn. The Woman Who Broke Her Silence, I said, but you can give it a better title when you tell it again. Because now, finally, it was her turn to carry the truth forward. And this time, she would tell it loud enough for both of us.